My wife thought she was flying off to a secret romance with another man. She had no idea I'd be sitting right beside her on that plane, ready to expose everything. What happened next changed both of our lives forever. 12 years into our marriage, my wife Sarah still thought of me, Pete, as her rock, the steady hand in her life. We'd built something strong together. After our daughter Lily was born 3 years ago, though, things between us had settled into a routine, especially in the bedroom. It wasn't bad, just predictable. But Sarah's love for me never wavered. Sarah had been working at a steel company for about 8 years. Not too long ago, her old boss, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, got replaced by a new guy, Alex Carter. Alex was young, charismatic, and the kind of man who drew people's attention without even trying. He was about 7 years younger than Sarah, and before she knew it, she found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, an excitement she couldn't explain. Now, it wasn't like Sarah ever wanted Alex to replace me. She loved me. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she started wondering what it would be like to be with him just once. She caught herself stealing glances at him, when he was in meetings, when he walked down the hall. And it didn't stop there. Sarah started dreaming about him, vivid dreams she tried to brush off as harmless fantasies. But as the days went by, those fantasies crept more and more into her waking thoughts, tugging at her whenever she saw Alex smile or heard him laugh. She kept telling herself she would never cross that line. She was a wife, a mother. Those thoughts were just daydreams. But sometimes, life has a funny way of putting temptation right in your path. One evening, Alex asked Sarah if she could stay late to help finish up an important client proposal. He was respectful, kept things professional the whole time. When they wrapped up, Alex leaned back in his chair, gave her a big grin and said, "This is great, Sarah. Thank you. Let me buy you dinner, you earned it." Sarah hesitated. For a second she fought back the pull she felt inside. But then, something in her gave way. That hunger that had been building for months finally overpowered her better judgment. They went out to a quiet little restaurant, shared a few laughs over dinner, and slowly their guards started to drop. Alex talked about his daughter, how much he adored her, and even showed Sarah pictures. He admitted he was still carrying some baggage from his last relationship but hoped he could eventually move forward. Sarah opened up too, about our family, about Lily, about the life we'd built. And even as she spoke about us, she found herself reaching out, lightly touching Alex's hand now and then as if her body had made the decision before her mind caught up. Dinner turned into hours. Hours turned into leaning closer. And before they knew it, they were standing at the door of the restaurant well after 1 in the morning, the world around them fading away. Later that night, tangled together in the sheets, Sarah whispered almost guiltily, "Alex, I have to get home. I never meant for this to happen. You've been a fantasy of mine ever since you walked through the door as my boss." Alex just smiled and brushed her hair out of her face. "Sarah," he said softly, "I've wanted you since the first day I met you. I was scared to even talk to you, afraid you'd see how badly I wanted you." She nodded, her heart pounding, torn between guilt and that lingering heat still crackling between them. "We'll find a way," she said quietly. "As long as we're careful." I guess somewhere along the line, Sarah started craving more than what we had. She didn't want love from anyone else, she had that with me. What she wanted was the excitement, the wild rush that comes from something new. Secretly, she had gotten bolder about suggesting we try different things in the bedroom. I noticed it one night when she leaned into me after dinner, her voice soft but charged, asking if we could mix things up a little. "Maybe try things a little differently tonight?" she said, almost like it was nothing. I gave her a sideways look, half smiling but confused. "Where's all this coming from, honey?" I asked her, raising an eyebrow. That's when Sarah's face fell just a little. She laughed it off nervously and dropped her eyes. "I've been reading too many romance novels lately," she said, brushing a hand over my chest. "I'm sorry if it's too much." I shook my head, trying to play it cool. "No, it's not that. I'm just surprised. You seem a lot more aggressive lately, that's all." I meant it as a half joke, but deep down, something tugged at me. A part of me wondered if maybe there was more to her sudden boldness than just a few steamy books. Meanwhile, what I didn't know was that somewhere else, in a dim room, Sarah's fantasies were becoming real. Alex, her boss, had his hands on her again, kneading her shoulders with slow, deliberate strokes. She let out a low moan under his touch, unable to hide how much she was enjoying it. Alex leaned down close and whispered, "Tell me something, Sarah. Hasn't your life between the sheets at home gotten a whole lot better since we started this thing?" For a moment she hesitated. But then she nodded, shame burning her cheeks. It was true, the fire Alex had lit inside her had spilled over into our bedroom. Our love life had never been more alive. And that truth made her heart ache in ways she didn't want to admit. She reached up, pulled Alex into a deep kiss and whispered against his lips, "God help me. I don't want to stop. You make me feel alive again." That same evening I was home first. I'd gotten off work early and I figured it would be a nice surprise to take Sarah and Lily out for dinner, a family night. The kind of night I lived for. Those two were my world. After showering, I slid open the glass door, still dripping wet when I spotted something strange. A tiny droplet of water caught between the panes of the glass, like it had leaked inside somehow. It was an odd thing to notice, but for some reason it stuck with me. I shook it off and started getting ready. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open. Sarah was home. She came into the bedroom, kicking off her shoes, her laughter still hanging in the air from some joke I hadn't heard. Slowly, she began undressing, peeling off layers until she stood in just her panties and bra. And that's when I saw it, something smeared faintly along her thigh. I blinked, my heart stuttering in my chest. "Sarah, what is that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She froze, following my eyes, then tried to laugh it off. "Pete, it's not what it looks like," she said hurriedly. "Let me explain." But I was already piecing it together. My stomach twisted painfully. "Explain what?" I said, my voice rising. "That's not from me." She opened her mouth, trying to find the words, but they came out in a flood that only made it worse. "You see, Alex and I cut her off, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Alex, your boss," I nearly shouted. "You're standing there with another man's mark running down your leg and you think you can just explain that away?" I backed away from her, feeling like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. "When did you lose yourself, Sarah? When did you forget what we promised each other?" My voice cracked and I hated how broken it sounded. Without thinking, I yanked an overnight bag from the closet, throwing in whatever I could grab, a shirt, some socks, shaving gear. My hands were trembling, but I couldn't stop moving. "If you won't leave," I said, forcing my voice steady, "then I will." I zipped the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked toward the door without looking back. I stood there in the doorway, my overnight bag hanging from my shoulder, heartbroken beyond anything I'd ever known. I looked at Sarah, or at least the woman who used to be my Sarah, and I said quietly, "I can't live with a stranger. And that's what you are to me now. You're not the woman I married. I don't even recognize you anymore." She opened her mouth, maybe to defend herself, but I kept going. My voice was shaking, but I needed her to hear this. "What have you lost with your little games with Alex?" I asked, feeling the anger clawing at my chest. "You lost nothing. Maybe just a little guilt in the moment. But what have I lost, Sarah? I've lost the one person I trusted more than anyone else. I've lost my best friend. I've lost the love of my life. I've lost us." I could see her flinch, but still, she didn't seem to understand the depth of the hurt she'd carved into me. "No," she whispered, almost too soft to hear. "No, I don't see it like that." And then, almost unbelievably, her face lit up, like she had figured out a way to explain everything away, to smooth it over like it was nothing more than a misunderstanding. "Pete," she said brightly, "remember that little water bubble you found in the shower door the other night? That drop stuck between the glass." She gave a small laugh like she thought this was clever. "Well, that's all this is. A tiny mistake. It doesn't ruin the door. It doesn't change what it is. This little thing with Alex. It doesn't change who we are either. It's just a small thing, a little imperfection. We're still fine." I stared at her, stunned. She really believed that? She thought the betrayal running down her leg was just a minor crack that could be ignored? My heart broke all over again. Sarah seemed convinced that I'd cool off eventually, that I'd realize our marriage was strong enough to survive her betrayal. She went to bed that night, slipping into sleep with a soft, content smile, probably dreaming of Alex, not even realizing how much damage had been done. Meanwhile, Alex was feeling pretty pleased with himself. Sure, he told Sarah he felt bad about her family crisis, but deep down he didn't care about anything except keeping her around for his own pleasure. To him, Sarah wasn't a broken-hearted wife. She was just convenient, a warm body to use whenever he wanted. If I forgave her, fine. If not, he figured he'd have his fun until he got bored and tossed her aside. One night, Alex grinned at her across the table, his hand reaching for hers. "Good news, sweetheart," he said. "I just booked us a 2-week Caribbean cruise. No judgment, no worries. Just you and me. Imagine how jealous Pete'll be when he realizes what he's lost after we get back." Sarah hesitated, her stomach twisting. She'd started to realize that this whole thing, this mess she'd made, wasn't the exciting fantasy she thought it would be. It was costing her far more than she had ever imagined. She had hurt the only man she truly loved. And now, spending time with Alex, the cracks in her dream lover were showing. His morning breath was awful, enough to make her turn away. He snored so loud at night that she barely got any sleep. The magic was wearing thin, fast. And then, on the 7th night of the cruise, after an argument about ending the affair, Alex got drunk and, in a moment of ugly anger, smacked her across the face with an open hand. She sat there afterward, stunned and hollow, touching her cheek in disbelief. Sure, he apologized later, his words slurring together in drunken regret. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. By the 14th day, Sarah's so-called fantasy had rotted away completely. She wasn't in love. She wasn't even in lust anymore. She was just broken. The day they docked back home, Alex turned to her casually, like none of it mattered, and said, "Don't bother coming into the office tomorrow." Just like that, cold and final. She had lost everything for a man who thought of her as nothing more than a convenience. And me? I was already gone. When I got home that night, the first thing I noticed was the letter sitting on the kitchen table, right next to the phone Sarah had obviously rushed toward but never picked up. My name was scrawled across the envelope in Pete's messy handwriting, the kind he only used when he was furious or heartbroken. My hands shook a little as I tore it open. Inside, the words hit like a punch. "Sarah, you once told me to deal with that little water bubble in the shower door. Well, I looked at it again, really looked, and you were wrong. Some things can't be patched up. There's no fixing this. So I'm making my choice. I'm not repairing the damage. I'm replacing the whole thing. I'm replacing the shower door. I'm replacing our marriage. I'm replacing you." I sat down hard on the kitchen chair, the letter trembling in my hands as I read on. "If you had come home after your little vacation, instead of running off with Alex, you would have found your daughter and me here, waiting, trying to salvage what was left. But you didn't. You brought back mold and mildew, you brought back rot. What you did was toxic, Sarah. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the very foundation we built together. My love for you is dead now. You killed it. I'm sure Alex will find a way to keep you around at work. He doesn't hold any real control over your private life. But the truth will spread and you'll need a thick skin because your paycheck is all you'll have left. You said that water bubble in the shower was a symbol of all this. You were right. If you want to remember the woman I married, the real you, go stare at that ruined door. Maybe you'll find her buried under the damage you did." At the bottom, in a small detached scrawl, he added, "You can keep the house if you can afford the mortgage. I've already signed the papers. Don't try to contact me." I sat there long after I finished reading, staring at the letter like it might change if I blinked enough. It didn't. My husband, my anchor, the man I had once known better than anyone, was gone. And all I had left were the ruins of what I'd thrown away. I was still sitting there, hollowed out and numb, when my memory shifted back to another moment, another time I had ignored the warning signs. It was years ago when I was married to Jeanette. We were both trying to survive the aftermath of the Great Recession. Dreams we'd once had, vacations, home improvements, even just simple security, had vanished, replaced by a constant sense of just scraping by. Jeanette hadn't been herself for a while. I asked her about it a few times that weekend, watching her drift through the house like a ghost. "You feeling okay?" I asked once as she leaned against the doorframe. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just got a lot on my mind." Didn't we both? I was brushing my teeth Sunday night when she walked into the bathroom, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. "Someone from work invited me on a ski trip," she said abruptly. "All expenses paid. Colorado. One of their friends backed out last minute. We leave Wednesday morning." I spat into the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. "Someone from work?" I asked, turning toward her. "That's an odd way to put it. Makes me think it's a man." Her face flushed bright red, the guilt so obvious she didn't even bother trying to hide it. "I think you just answered my question," I said quietly. She stammered something about how it wasn't like that, how he was a nice guy, who had just been dumped and didn't want to waste a non-refundable ticket. "Everything's already paid for," she added quickly. "Hotel, lift tickets, the whole thing. Won't cost me a dime." I leaned against the sink, studying her. "Isn't that convenient?" I muttered. "Now tell me, what's his name?" I slammed my hand down on the kitchen counter hard enough to make the coffee mug rattle. "John what?" I demanded. "Does this guy even have a last name?" "Johnson. Jackson. You got me so riled up I can't even think straight." Jeanette just shrugged, looking annoyed like I was the one being unreasonable. "You're telling me you're about to fly across the country with a man whose last name you don't even know?" I said, my voice rising. Either you're messing around with him already, or you're out of your mind. She didn't answer. She just turned on her heel and headed toward the bedroom, leaving me standing there, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. She crawled into bed and pretended to sleep. I didn't bother trying. I sat up for hours, staring into the dark, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, everything I couldn't believe was happening. By 6 o'clock the next morning I was already up, brewing a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She wandered into the kitchen a little while later, poured herself a cup, took one sip, and dumped the rest down the sink without a word. I'm going to work, she said flatly, grabbing her bag. I knew that look. When Jeanette dug in, there was no budging her. She was the most stubborn woman I'd ever met, willing to drive straight into a wall rather than admit she was wrong. On the drive into the office I kept thinking, pleading with her wasn't going to work. Logic wasn't going to cut it either. This was one of those moments my grandmother used to talk about, when a good, swift kick in the pants was the only thing that might save what mattered. About a year earlier, I'd hired a private investigator named Julio for a case at work. Good kid. Sure. He knew how to get things done. By lunch, I had already made up my mind. If Jeanette wasn't going to give me the truth, I'd find it myself. At 1:10 p.m. my desk phone rang. Boss, it's me, Julio said. I got something. He sounded excited but cautious. He told me he'd spotted Jeanette's mystery man, and that they were talking real cozy, but he couldn't get close enough to hear what they were saying. When they split up, Julio said, I tailed him into the elevator. He acted like I wasn't even there. Julio got off on the same floor, pretending to search for a room number. Eventually, he watched the guy duck into a suite marked Anderson Veterinary Supplies, LLC. Julio, that's great, I said. What about the name? There was a pause. Well, boss, turns out you were right. Jackson Johnson. None of that's his real name. My stomach twisted. What is it then? Robert Jensen, Julio said. Name's Robert Jensen. And you're not gonna like this, he's got a real slimeball vibe. Julio chuckled under his breath, telling me how he'd been hiding in a bathroom stall when Jensen walked in, didn't even bother to wash his hands after using the restroom. Another guy came in afterward, gave him a casual greeting. Hey, Mr. Jensen. That's when Julio knew for sure. He even fished out 2 huge garbage bags Jensen had tossed, hoping for more dirt. Boss, people throw away way too much good stuff. Got IDs, receipts, all kinds of legal-looking documents with his real name. You did great, Julio, I said. We'll go through everything tomorrow. Good work. But even before I hung up, my mind was already racing toward the next step. That evening when Jeanette got home I was ready. Calm, collected, but cold inside. I want the names and phone numbers of every couple going on this trip, I said without even greeting her. And don't give me the runaround. Now. She looked at me like a kid caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Well, Robert, didn't actually rent the chalet. His uncle owns it. And he doesn't have a cell phone. I barked out a bitter laugh. Doesn't have a cell phone? 5-year-olds have cell phones, Jeanette. You expect me to believe that? She crossed her arms tight across her chest. Look, she snapped, if I get you all the information you want, will you stop bullying me and just let me have some fun? Her face softened a little, almost like she thought this was a negotiation. You've got 1 day, I said, my voice low. 1. To get me everything I asked for. She smiled then, smug and triumphant like she'd won something. Why don't you just admit it? She said, tilting her head. You're just jealous because I'm going to Colorado. I slammed my fist down on the kitchen table, the sound echoing through the house. She jumped. Good. Maybe now she would understand that this wasn't about jealousy. It was about respect. It was about trust. It was about a marriage she was tossing away for a man who couldn't even tell the truth about his name. I'm not jealous, I muttered under my breath as I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the pile Julio had given me. It was a stack of stuff Robert Jensen, or whatever name he was going by, had just tossed into the trash like it was nothing. Julio had pieced everything back together like a jigsaw puzzle. Checking account statements, torn up legal notices, even a certified letter from a lawyer's office. He told me Jensen had ripped the envelopes in half, like that was somehow going to stop an identity thief. Julio had spent hours taping them back together, organizing them for me. The first thing he handed me made my stomach drop. A heavy legal-size envelope sent by certified mail to Robert Jensen himself. Jensen was being dragged into court for unpaid child support. 2 kids. Over a year without paying a dime to their mother. And that was just the beginning. Julio had also dug into the Chicago Tribune archives and found out the real reason Jensen was using fake names like Johnson and Jackson. He was a convicted sexual offender. The crime had happened in Denver, but Jensen was a Chicago boy. All 3 major newspapers printed the story back then, complete with his mugshot, and there was no mistaking it was him. Not a lot of details were released, probably because of a plea deal that spared the victim the trauma of a trial. But Jensen had pled guilty to sexual assault and served 24 months behind bars. That was the man Jeanette was planning to take a free ski trip with. My hands trembled with fury as I read through it all. The next morning I filed for divorce. 3 copies, all stamped with the official seal and case number. I wasn't playing games anymore. I walked into my boss's office, told him I needed a few personal days to handle some family stuff. He was a good man, he didn't ask questions. When I got home, Jeanette was in the kitchen making dinner. A real dinner, not something microwaved out of a box. Probably thought a home-cooked meal would soften me up. I hugged her, kissed her. She responded, but it felt stiff, like she was going through the motions. Over dinner, I laid it all out calmly. "Jeanette," I said, setting down my fork, "I called the numbers you gave me for the other couples on this so-called ski trip. Neither number worked. I searched online for their names. Nothing. I checked Facebook too. Nothing." I watched her face closely. "I'm sorry, but everything this Robert Jensen told you is a lie. There's no group trip. There's no couples retreat. You were never invited to some innocent little getaway. You were being played." I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally see how deep this rabbit hole went. Instead, Jeanette's face twisted in anger. Next thing I knew, she grabbed the frying pan, dinner still sizzling inside, and slammed it down hard on the stove. She pointed at me, fire in her eyes. "You're threatening me?" "I'm not threatening you," I said evenly, refusing to raise my voice. "I'm making a solemn vow. And you know I keep my word." She stared at me like I was the enemy. "I don't get it," she said, her voice shaking. "Why don't you trust me? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just trying to have a little fun. You're making this out to be something it's not." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to hold on to whatever patience I had left. "You're a beautiful woman," I said slowly. "And Robert Jensen, that man, has already proven he's not a gentleman. Any decent man would have backed off the second he found out you're married. But instead, he's lying to you, lying about everything, and trying to get you alone hundreds of miles away from anyone who knows you." She crossed her arms, defiant. "He's just letting me use a ticket that would have gone to waste. I told you I'd reimburse him. I'll pay him for the ticket myself," I said firmly. "We'll go skiing together, you and me. Just us." "It's too late," she snapped. "We're leaving tomorrow morning." The emotional part of me still wanted to believe I could swoop in and save our marriage, to be the knight in shining armor she needed. But another part of me, the tired, heartbroken part, knew some things can't be saved when the other person has already walked away. And Jeanette? She had packed her bags long before she packed her suitcase. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I kept turning it all over in my head, weighing my options, arguing with myself. In the end, I chose a compromise. Not the high road. Not revenge either. Something in between. I was up before the sun, pacing the kitchen with a coffee mug I barely touched. Jeanette was icy cold toward me, ignoring me completely as she bustled around, packing the last of her things. I must have finally pushed her too far when I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of her by the door. "What the hell are you doing?" she snapped. I shrugged, sliding the phone back into my pocket. "So the police will have a current photo if they need to identify your body." She exploded into a storm of curses that would have made a sailor blush. I didn't flinch. I just turned and walked into the bedroom. Turns out, Mr. Jensen's big romantic plan didn't even include paying for parking. The chauffeur he sent to pick her up told her it was cheaper to take the subway downtown. Jeanette offered to chip in, but he just waved her off, telling her to hang on to her money. They'd need it once they got to Colorado. I smirked at the irony. While she was in the bathroom, I checked her wallet. She had less than $100 to her name. If she was planning to use our joint credit cards, well, that ship had already sailed. I canceled them right after booking my own ticket. I wish I could have read her mind as she struggled through the maze of stairwells and underground tunnels Chicagoans call the L. No fancy rides for her, just a grimy subway and crowds. To top it off, the TSA agent at security read her the riot act, even confiscated the corkscrew she tried to pack in her carry-on. Little things. But it all added up. The timing had to be perfect for my plan to work. I'd paid extra for early boarding and was one of the first passengers on the plane. Sliding into my middle seat, I waited. Jeanette had the window seat. I told myself, if she chose to sit beside me maybe, I'd show her everything I had. Maybe I'd give her a chance to explain. Lady Luck decided for me. A young, good-looking guy claimed the aisle seat a few minutes later, and I could already hear the buzz of whispers from other passengers. Something was happening at the gate. I glanced over and saw Jensen, or should I say Robert Jensen, arguing with the flight crew. The lead flight attendant, clearly done with his nonsense, stormed up from the galley. "This flight is packed," she barked. "Take your assigned seat. After takeoff, we'll see if we can shuffle seats if there's room." Jensen was flailing his boarding pass in the air, trying to argue. "I paid to sit next to my girlfriend," he shouted. Jeanette's face finally registered confusion, and then horror, as she realized who was sitting in the middle seat between them. Me. Her husband. The man she thought she'd left behind. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed. "You did this, you're humiliating me." I smiled, tight and tired. "I'm humiliating you?" I said quietly. "You might want to ask your boyfriend why he didn't bother to buy you a return ticket." I pulled out the trip itinerary and slid it across the tray table toward her. Right there, in black and white. Her ticket was one way. Jeanette's face drained of color. She turned to Jensen, her voice cracking. "John, why don't I have a return ticket?" He ignored her, too busy arguing with the flight attendant, demanding she move me elsewhere. Meanwhile, I leaned in just loud enough for her to hear over the noise. "And you're not going to tell me," I said slowly, "that he forgot to mention he spent 2 years behind bars for beating his ex-wife so badly she spent almost a month in the hospital." Her eyes widened in horror. The fantasy was unraveling, and it was happening in front of a full flight of strangers. I leaned in closer and slid a few photos onto Jeanette's lap. They were pictures of a woman, one of Jensen's past victims. Her face looked eerily like Jeanette's, twisted in fear, caught in mid-argument with an airline worker. Jeanette just stared down at them, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She turned away, blinking fast. Maybe it was starting to sink in. Meanwhile, Jensen, or should I say Robert Jensen, the predator, was still too stupid to realize the walls were closing in on him. But finally, you could see it in his eyes. He knew his little plan had blown up in his face. He snapped. "I'm going to kill you," he screamed and lunged across the narrow aisle at me. Unfortunately for him, I saw it coming. I shifted just enough, and his punch landed square on the flight attendant's face instead. Chaos broke loose instantly. The guy sitting next to me, who it turned out was a starting defensive tackle for a Big Ten college team, had Jensen pinned to the floor before most people even realized what happened. Flight crew were shouting, passengers were on their feet, and cell phones were snapping pictures and recording video from every direction. It was a complete circus. Jeanette just sat there frozen. She didn't defend him. She didn't defend herself. She just turned her face away in silence, too ashamed, or maybe too scared, to move. An airline security guard appeared a few minutes later and told both Jeanette and me that we were being remanded into the custody of the Chicago Police Department because of the disturbance. As we walked off the plane, escorted like criminals through the airport, I caught a flight attendant telling the gate agent, 3 seats just opened up. I couldn't help it. I muttered a small prayer of thanks under my breath. The shame was complete now. Everyone was staring, snapping photos, whispering. Jeanette finally understood what real humiliation felt like. When we got to the police station, things only got worse. While we were being processed, officers showed me more evidence they had gathered from Jensen's seized luggage. I showed some of it to Jeanette. One picture was all it took to make her vomit right there on herself. The chalet she thought she was being whisked away to? It was nothing more than a tar paper shack stuck behind an auto salvage yard. Inside they had set up restraints and chains, literal shackles. 4 of Jensen's associates, 2 couples, were already there waiting. And they had stocked enough sedatives in Jensen's bag to knock out an entire circus. Their plan was clear. Get Jeanette to that shack. Drug her. And then God only knows what else. The lead detective pulled me aside quietly. "Listen," he said, "even after all she's done, if she says she's sorry, if she shows real remorse, I'll let you tear these documents up. Today. It's your call. But either way, I still recommend you go through with the divorce. For your own safety." "You have my word," I said. "I won't tip her off." A few minutes later, they led Jeanette into the interview room. One quick glimpse was all it took. She looked like a ghost, pale, sick, smelling of fear and vomit. She collapsed into a chair and broke down, sobbing so hard it shook her shoulders. The detective dropped a folder in front of her with a heavy thud. "Read," he ordered. Jeanette screamed so loud halfway through that the detective ran back in, thinking something had happened to her. Nothing had, she was just finally realizing the nightmare she had been walking straight into. I didn't say another word to her. When they released us, I handed her my apartment keys without a second glance. "I've already packed my stuff," I said quietly. "Anything I left behind, donate it or throw it away." And just like that, I walked away from the woman I had once thought I'd spend my life with. I never looked back. The next time I saw her was across a courtroom. The judge ordered us into marriage counseling. I agreed to go, but not to fix anything. I went because I wanted closure. Even the counselor saw the truth within the first few sessions. Jeanette was manipulative, selfish, and blind to the damage she caused. There was no fixing what had been broken. Not anymore. I walked away from that marriage with my dignity, my peace, and my soul intact. And that, in the end, was worth more than anything I ever left behind.